subject of drinking alcohol. Just simply says, what about drinking? And of course, there is a continued shift in public thinking with regard to this subject over the last, I'll just say, 100 years. That's about the time of the temperance movement in the early part of the 20th century, and so there are the Bible has quite a bit to say about this subject, and so we want to see what the Bible does have to say. And as it says at the bottom in the bolded section, our attitudes must be determined by what God teaches and not by the opinions of the world. Now let me just add to that. Doesn't matter whose opinion. Not just the opinion of the world, people's opinion, period. In other words, what the Bible says is the standard, okay? And so let's go ahead and turn over to page 26 and look at some things. And by the way, almost everything that we're going to look at today is not in this lesson. All right. I mean, I could show you my book and show you all the handwritten notes and whatnot, but we're going to talk about some things that are in the text itself, and then we're going to talk about what particularly the Old Testament and the New Testament have to say about the matter. Now, the top of the page, says consider the immense evil that has been caused by intoxicants. Look at the slaughter on the highways. It just seemed like there was a number when I was growing up that somewhere between 30 and 50,000 people die on the highways every single year as a result of drunk driving. 30 to 50,000. And I've oftentimes said, nuclear power hasn't killed anybody, and people, if you're old enough to remember people protesting nuclear power plants and all that, and it's like, you know what? If nuclear power killed 30 to 50,000 people a year, there'd never be a nuclear plant built. In other words, what I'm saying is that people's attitude towards some things does not mirror the reality of other things. And so, and by the way, just 20 or 30 to 50,000 people, dead on the highways is only a sampling. Okay, it's only a sampling of the destruction. Of people who die by other means as a result of alcohol use or abuse. Almost all crime has some connection to alcohol. And when I say, let me back up and say this: the majority of all crime have some connection to alcohol. Many of your bankruptcies have some connection to alcohol. A massive number of divorces are attributed to alcohol, and so domestic violence almost invariably is tied in some way to the use of alcohol. And so the abuse of alcohol is a massive blight on our society. All right, and look, I'm speaking to you as somebody who grew up with a dad who was an alcoholic. All right, the whole time I was growing up, my dad was just shy of 19 when I was born. Almost 1 month. I was a day shy of being 1 month to his birthday, June the 9th, also Big Boy's birthday. But my dad already had a problem with alcohol in his late teens, and he never shook it, ever. And then my dad died at 48. He didn't die. His death was not attributed to alcohol, but he was an alcoholic all of his life. And alcohol always created problems in my family growing up. I remember, having to go places to try to find my dad when I was a kid, riding with my mom, her getting us out of bed in the middle of the night, trying to go find my dad. I can remember when my dad worked in Tennessee. We were living in Dexter, and my dad's favorite drinking place was in a lounge of a restaurant in Dexter, and you could see the restaurant from my house. It was a pretty good ways off, but it was a straight shot to the back parking lot of the Hickory Log Restaurant, which is a famous restaurant in Dexter. People in that area all know it. And the lounge was in the back. And my dad worked in Memphis and Collierville during the week and came home on the weekends. And invariably Friday night would roll around and it would be 7, 8 o'clock at night. Plenty of time for Dad to be home from Memphis, and Dad wouldn't be home, and all I had to do is either get out a rifle or a pair of binoculars and look down, and I'd see that green Cadillac parked behind the restaurant. My dad went to the lounge, before he came home after not having seen his family for a week. All right, so I'm giving you my perspective. All right, as a person who grew up in a situation that was really adversely affected by alcohol, and so it's just there's a reason. There's a reason, and I don't know if this is still true or not, but there's a reason that people that gamble a lot get free drinks. And I think we all know the reason for that. All right, and so I'm just giving you a little bit of my background and my views of growing up with a father who was an alcoholic all of my life until he died in '96. And so there is the incredible misery, the factor of misery, death, and destruction that has been created through the use and the abuse of alcohol. All right. Secondly, there is the matter of influence, and we are to guard our influence as Christians. For example, the phrase, I've used this before because it's true, but it's kind of comical in a way. It's like, hey, why don't you come over to my house for Bible study and a beer? All right, so it's like that just doesn't even. That just kind of like scrapes on your eardrum, doesn't it? That type of statement. And so we understand that that there is the matter of our influence, and then there would be even what you might refer a perceived hypocrisy of one with regard to a Christian who engages in social drinking. Now. Now we're getting to the third paragraph. What does the Bible specifically say about drinking? All right. Well, we can look at these two passages from the book of Proverbs, chapter 20, and verse number 1, and we can look at Proverbs chapter 23. We'll start in 20 and verse number 1. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler or raging, depending on what translation you're reading, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. Also, over to chapter 23. For example, in verse number 19, it says, "Hear, my son, and be wise, and guide your heart in the way. Do not mix or consort with winebibbers or with gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags." Over down to verse 29, same chapter, who has woe, who has sorrow, who has contentions, who has complaints, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of eyes, those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent, stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things. Your heart will utter perverse things. You will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, or like one who lies at the top of the mast, saying, they have struck me, but I was not hurt. They have beaten me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake that I may seek another drink? And so the Bible speaks pretty clearly here about those who indulge, or we might say overindulge in the consumption of alcoholic beverages. Now, looking at going down into this paragraph again, Romans chapter 13. We'll read the texts that are in the lesson. Then there are some other things that we certainly need to consider. It says, let us walk properly, as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness, not in lewdness and lust, not in strife or envy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lusts. Then, of course, drunkenness is one of the works of the flesh, as listed in Galatians chapter 5, and begins in verse 19. But drunkenness is found in verse 21. It says, and as I told you in time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. And so the Bible is, again, clear on the matter of sobriety and the difficulties that are associated with drinking alcohol. Now, I'm just going to tell you, in the second half of this paragraph, the one drink will make you one drink drunk, or there's an old argument of one drop drunk. I don't buy it. I don't think it's a good argument. I mean, and I'll give you a reason why. I've drank NyQuil, right? I get ready to go to bed, stuffed up. I can't drink it now because it messes up my system, all right? And so, by the way, NyQuil is about 25% alcohol by volume, which is the equivalent of what's called 50 proof. If you're wondering about what the proof number means in alcohol, if I'm not mistaken, the number of proof is double the alcohol content. So like 80 proof liquor is 40% alcohol by volume. All right, that kind of gives you a gauge there. So you drink NyQuil before you get ready to go to bed, or to help you sleep, or whatever. It's about 25% alcohol by volume, which is about twice as much alcohol as a common bottle of wine. Wine is about 12 to 15% alcohol by volume, and beer is generally 5% alcohol by volume just on a standard. I remember growing up, you couldn't buy real beer on Sunday in my hometown, but you could buy near beer, which was 3.2% alcohol by volume. They actually made a lower content beer, to get by various laws that were in place. And so, again, I'm just giving you a gauge. But I never sat down in front of the TV after drinking that little goofy little cup of NyQuil and felt like I was in any way intoxicated. And so that's why I'm telling you, I reject the argument of the one drop drunk argument. It's just not a good argument. All right, and so there is a distinction between the use of alcohol. You notice the word use of alcohol and the abuse of alcohol. And so I reject that particular argument. Also, there's talks about the qualifications for elders and deacons in 1 Timothy chapter 3. I'm not a fan of this particular argument with regard to, it says that deacons are not to be given to much wine. Elders, it says in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 3 says not given to wine, and then deacons not given to much wine. Now, the word there means the word given there means to be inclined toward. Okay, it means to be inclined toward, not given to wine, and then not given to much wine with regard to the deacons. Now, here's where a lot of the arguments fall apart with regard to alcohol and its prevalence in the first century. All right, and that is that the word oinos that is found in the New Testament it has been said of this word that it can mean either alcoholic or non-alcoholic grapes or grape juice or wine. In other words, it can refer to either alcoholic content wine or it can refer to grape juice. The problem with that argument is it won't stand up to the test of Scripture. And it won't stand up to the test of the language. The Greeks had a word for grape juice, and it was not oinos. It was trux. Right? Some of you that have been around here a while know that I oftentimes say the Greeks had a word for it, right? For example, I use that terminology or that phrase when I'm talking about baptism. When the Greeks wanted to say immerse, they had a word for it. And the word was baptize. And they had a different word for pouring water, and they had a different word for sprinkling water. So, in other words, to try to make baptism into pouring or sprinkling is foolish because the Greeks had a word for those things, and it wasn't baptism. All right? Well, the same argument applies, or the same logic applies to this particular word. The word oinos is never used in the New Testament in regard to non-alcoholic wine, or never used in regard to grape juice. It's used in regard to wine. Well, no, when it says wine, it's wine. All right. Now, let me put a point right here and make another comment. The wine of the New Testament, by alcoholic volume, was nowhere near the wine that is served today in American culture. Do you remember what number I gave you for the wine? What's alcoholic volume? What's the volume of alcohol in wine? What was the number I gave you? 12 to 15% alcohol by volume. All right. The alcoholic content of oinos in the New Testament was actually less than beer in American culture. It's like 2 or 3%. All right, it's a very low number. All right. Also, many times it would be mixed with water on a number of reasons, but mostly to make sure the water's pure. Because as we all know, even today, there's a lot of places where water sources are not great. All right, and so it would be mixed to help purify the water. It could also be boiled. Now, boiling does not remove all the alcoholic content, but if you can probably boil up in a couple of hours, you could probably boil about 30% of the volume of alcohol out of wine. But when you're starting with 2 or 3%, it's just such a no. You're starting with such a small amount. Boiling it would only be a means of probably just a purification and not for the intention of lowering the alcohol content, because alcohol content is already extremely low in most cases. All right, And so, when the New Testament uses the word wine, we need to understand that it means exactly that. It doesn't mean grape juice. It's never used in that context. Now, let me make one more statement. The word wine is never ever used in connection to the Lord's Supper. Now, I think that's important. The word wine is never used, because I heard two old men talking one time when I was working in Prescott, and I could call his name, wouldn't mean anything to anybody else, but he made this statement, and his position was he was trying to defend social drinking. And he says, if it says wine in the Lord's Supper, it means wine. And I didn't say anything, but it's like, I should have said, it never says that. It says the fruit of the vine. All right? The fruit of the vine. Now, does that eliminate wine? No. I'm just saying it's interesting that in all the other instances where we find wine in the New Testament, that's what it's talking about, but it never uses it in regard to the Lord's Supper. So it doesn't mandate it in the Lord's Supper, but it doesn't eliminate it either. Now, to me, common sense would eliminate it, because number one, you're still not dealing with the wine of the Bible and the wine in 21st century America. I would never ever advocate for serving any kind of alcoholic wine in the Lord's Supper, just because alcohol is such a problem for so many people. Why would somebody do that if you had a recovering alcoholic in your congregation? That'd be just like, if there was ever a casting of a stumbling block in front of somebody, that would certainly qualify. But the reason I'm mentioning this use of the word oinos is because it means wine. All right. Now, what I want to do is I want to look at some of the New Testament texts, and time's not going to permit me to deal with all the Old Testament texts, probably any of them. For example, look in Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11, and beginning in verse 18. Jesus is talking about how these Jewish people can never be satisfied. We laugh and you won't laugh, and we weep and you won't weep. There's nothing anybody does can make you happy. All right, that's the context here. Now, you find fault in everything, even the things that are the opposite. All right, he says, "For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a what? A wine bibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, but wisdom is justified by her children." Now, the word wine bibber just simply means a wine drinker, but it's used in this context as hyperbole. Hyperbole. All right. But here's the point that needs to be made about this, is that in everyday Jewish culture, that very low content wine was commonplace. In other words, the Jews didn't practice the idea that absolutely no alcohol could ever be consumed by anybody at any time. And by the way, I can and will prove that from the Old Testament. But my point is that it appears from the text that even Jesus drank what was called wine in the days of the New Testament. Again, that very tiny alcoholic content, and not to excess, because the text is speaking hyperbole. Because Jesus was certainly not a glutton, right? But they used the terminology as a wine bibber. Now, why would they use that terminology if Jesus didn't just live like every other Jew in the New Testament times was living. Again, he wasn't a drunkard, but the text, again, the words of the text are pretty clear. That nobody could have said that about Jesus if he didn't live, in essence, like every other faithful Jew in the first century. Right? There were a group of people in the Old Testament who were forbidden to consume any part of the grape. The Nazarites. The Nazarites. It wasn't that they were only forbidden to drink wine. They couldn't even, they weren't even allowed to eat grapes. No product of the vine at all. All right? And so, but that, again, that also tells us what was Jewish life like, in those days. All right? That there was that, well, in the Hebrew, it's yayin. If you're going to spell it and do a Google search, it's Yayin, yayin. All right? And so, Brother Earl Edwards said this in open forum at Freed Hardman a number of years ago. He said, as a people, we have done a good job of letting the Bible speak where it speaks. He says, but in this case, we have a hard time separating ourselves from the temperance movement. In other words, we're reading into New Testament life and practice what American life and practice was 100 years ago, and he said it's just not what the Bible says. All right, now let's keep moving. Look in Romans 14. Now, Romans 14 is the ultimate text on what are called scruples, and scruples are personal convictions, right? That's what scruples are. They are matters of personal conviction. Now we're going to go to the end of Romans 14, and we're going to start in verse 20. And I didn't intend to go here this early, but I felt like I probably needed to pacify a few of you, because you've probably never heard anybody say what I've said this morning. All right, look at verse number 20. Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. Well, let me go back to verse 19. Therefore, let us pursue the things that make for peace, and the things by which one may edify another. Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. All things indeed are pure, but it is evil for the man who eats with offense. In other words, who violates his conscience. All right? But did you see there? All things indeed are pure. Verse 21. It is good neither to eat meat, nor to drink what? Wine. Nor do anything by which your brother stumbles or is offended or made weak. Now, if this is talking about grape juice, that verse doesn't make a lick of sense, does it? Is that right? If this verse is talking about grape juice, this verse don't make a lick of sense, because who has ever been offended by somebody drinking Welch's? Nobody. So what does Paul say? He says, if your conscience permits it, keep it to yourself. In other words, do not allow your conscience, or the freedom of your conscience, to cause someone else to stumble. I mean, is that what the text says? It's what it says. And so why? And now the next thing is, why would Paul say that if some members of the church were not, in some small way, drinking wine? Why would he say that if they were not? He wouldn't say that if they were not, but they were. But what did he say about it? He says, don't allow your liberty to cause a stumbling block in front of your brethren whose consciences are affected by it. I'll use myself as an example. By the way, I'm not advocating for social drinking. Can we be clear on that? I'm not advocating for that. My background tells me people need to stay away from that as far as humanly possible. So that's why I'm going to use myself as an example. All right? Let's just say that I thought it was all right. If I thought it was all right if I was out at a restaurant and a meal and I was going to have a glass of wine, if I thought that was all right and I was going to have a glass of wine at a meal. All right? If the possibility existed that somebody who knew me would see me, whether a Christian or otherwise, although Romans 14 is talking about Christians, if there was a possibility that someone would see me and it would cause them to stumble or to think less of me, then what do I need to do? I need to drink Pepsi. That's right. I need to drink Pepsi. That's what Romans 14 is saying. But the point of the matter is that Paul is talking about things that Christians were participating in. And he did not condemn them in so doing. He says, but if you cause anybody to stumble, you got to refrain. By the way, and it wasn't just about drinking wine. It was also about eating meat. And we all know that there's absolutely nothing wrong with eating meat, right? And if you're a vegan, I apologize, kinda. All right? But I've been to most of our church fellowships, and I'm pretty sure we don't have any vegans in the group. All right? But we all know that there's nothing wrong with eating meat. But Paul says if eating meat causes your brother to stumble, what do? You don't eat meat. When you're with them. It doesn't mean that you can't go somewhere else and eat meat or go to your house and eat meat. And you certainly wouldn't invite them over to your house to eat and serve meat. And so the matter of scruples in Romans 14 and Paul's use of this terminology is pretty clear. And so again, we have to understand what is under consideration with regard to the language, and then what is to be understood in consideration of the context. Now, I don't want to go any further because some other things I want to get into that are a little more in depth, and also this. I want you to have some time to kind of ruminate on this a little bit and think about it, study it, mull it over in your mind. As the old saying is, I don't want to feed you the whole bale of hay, in one sitting. All right. So we'll pick up in a study. Let me just give you some passages. We have a little bit of time here. Let me give you some passages to write down. I want you to write down Deuteronomy 14:26. I want you to write down Deuteronomy 14:26. I want you to write down Psalm 104, verse 15. Ecclesiastes, if you can't spell it, just write ECC. Ecclesiastes 9:7 and 10:19. Ecclesiastes 9:7 and 10:19. Habakkuk. Can't spell that, right? H-A-B. It's the only book in the Bible that starts with those three letters.
Sorry to feel like you're calling me
out. Well, I wasn't looking at you, Matt. I was just looking at Ashley because she keeps laughing at me every time I say that. She might be calling you out. Habakkuk 2:15. 1 Peter 4, verse 3. That's going to be an important one for us next week. Isaiah 24:8. But it's not just 8, it's 8 following. So write 24:8 and then write FF. If you've ever seen my handouts, the letters FF means the verses following. Did I give you Proverbs 31:6? One more, Genesis 43:34. All right. Now that's every verse that I have written down here that we haven't discussed this morning. 43:34. If I didn't say it right, Genesis 43:34. right, everybody got them? All right, all right. Now that'll get us prepared for next Sunday.